Growing in Greenstalk planters are my favorite to grow in the fall garden. But if I've already been growing for spring crops and summer crops, how do I make the transition to the fall crops? In today's video, I'm going to talk about what to do with the summer crops that are still growing in your Greenstalk, how to decide which fall crops to grow and when to plant, how to amend the planter with fresh soil for fall planting, and important considerations when it comes to sunlight, shade, and watering as we head into fall. But before we get started, I want to make sure that you know that Greenstalk is getting ready to have their big summer blowout sale on some of their best-selling Greenstalk planters. This sale starts tomorrow, August 31st, 2023, and it goes through September 7th. This 3-tier original planter is on sale for $64.97, and the 5-tier leaf is on sale for $79.97. They've also got some great sales on bundle deals, so if you're interested in more than one planter, then check out those. And you can use my code Jill10 to get $10 off your order of $75 or more. To shop this sale, visit the link in the show notes or go to journeywithjill.net/Greenstalk. The first thing we need to do before we transition to the fall garden in our Greenstalks is we need to take an account of what's currently growing in them and what to do about that. Now, a lot of that will depend on when you're needing to plant based on your relative first frost date and your freeze and your daylight and all of that, which we talked about in a previous video. But for now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you what's currently growing in my Greenstalks in the middle of August, because a lot of the crops that I'm going to be planting are going to be planted in the next few weeks. So that'll give you an idea what I'm going to leave, what I'm going to take out, and the reasons behind it. So right here I have my 7-tier leaf planter. This is the one with the smaller pockets, and I've got bush beans growing in that. This was a succession planting of bush beans. As you can tell, it's just now flowering. We also have some little pods of green beans, so it's just now starting to begin to produce. So there's no way I'm taking these beans out of this planter yet. But I do want to have a plan for what's going to go here once they're done producing. And as soon as I get what I need to get out of those beans, I'm going to take the entire plants out. I'm going to start planting crops in these tiers. So right now, what I want to do is I want to plan what I'm going to plant in these tiers, kind of like I did in the spring garden when I used the exact same thing for succession planting in the spring. You can check out this video right here to see how I plan that out and what I do with that. But for the most part, I'm going to be planting lettuces and greens, direct sowing and transplanting in this planter. So once these are ready to come out, then I will be ready to get those plants in. Now, if I'm going to be planting lettuce, I will have already started them indoors like this. So that way, when these beans come out, I can go ahead and put the transplants in. You can also direct sow lettuce as long as the soil temperature isn't too high. But I do like to transplant mine just so that I can get them started earlier. And then as soon as these come out, I can get the lettuce in. The next thing I'm going to do is take a look at what I've got growing here in my 3-tier original. This is one of the ones that's on sale. This has the deeper pockets, and I've got a lot of herbs growing in this. Depending on what herb it is will depend on what I do with it. So right here I've got marjoram, and what I'm going to do with marjoram is, because it's not perennial in my zone, I'm in zone 7 and it didn't survive the winter last year. I think it will survive about zone 8. Of course, that kind of depends on how your winter goes, but I'm going to leave the marjoram in here because before we get a freeze, I'll definitely harvest it and dry it. I like to use marjoram in Italian seasoning mix. So I'll actually leave the marjoram in here even through the fall and until we get the freeze. I also have some parsley here. I have parsley down here and also some parsley up here. Parsley is a biennial, which means it will survive my winter in zone 7, but in the spring it will start to develop seed. What I've noticed is that usually parsley will survive my winter and I can trim from it all winter long. What I will do though is whenever the heat breaks, I will harvest a good amount of the parsley and dry it for dried use, but then I'll keep it in here over the winter. So I'm not taking the parsley out. Down here I have oregano, and what I've noticed about oregano when I plant it in my Greenstalk planter is that the first year it does really well, as you can tell. But because oregano is kind of like mint in that it likes to spread, I found that 1 year is about my max to keep them in the Greenstalk, and then I need to transplant them into a larger container. So this I will actually leave in over the winter time, and then I'll probably transplant it in the spring into a larger container. But I'll leave it. I will probably again harvest some when the heat breaks just to be able to dry it to have in my spice cabinet. But I'm not going to take this out to plant anything else for the fall because it will definitely continue to produce all winter. With the other tiers here, I was growing arugula all summer, but when I harvested them, I planted some potatoes in these tiers. I do have some that are starting to break dormancy. The ones I planted, I'm waiting for them to emerge. Some of the ones in my grow bags and in my other Greenstalk are already starting to emerge, so these should start to emerge any day. My goal for these fall potatoes is if I need to, I'll put them in my greenhouse, but for the most part, what I'll do is I'll just let the potatoes grow here all fall, since that's a fall crop, and then harvest them whenever they're ready. So basically with this entire planter, I'm really not doing anything differently because everything that's already in here, including the potatoes that I planted a couple weeks ago, will stay for the fall. The 5-tier Greenstalk here, another one that's on sale, I absolutely love. It's got the smaller pockets and there's 5. So if you're just starting to consider a Greenstalk and want a smaller option, this is a great option along with the 3-tier. As you can see, this one's gonna need a little bit of work to get ready for fall. These are the strawberries that I planted last spring, and they're not looking terribly great. I need to trim some. I mean, some are still pretty healthy and putting out runners, but I need to trim the runners off. I need to trim off a lot of the diseased parts of the foliage. And some of them just died entirely over this summer, whereas they survived last summer and into the spring. Sometimes strawberries just kind of have a shelf life, especially in our heat. So I'm going to be clearing out and trimming out all of these just to get them a little bit more tidy and assess what I need to take out and what pockets I have available. Up here I have arugula. This arugula hasn't done all that great. I think honestly I've overwatered this container altogether. I've had it on the automatic timer and I think it's just been too much. I think that's why it's kind of been suffering. So most likely I'll take this arugula out and I'll just replant, and then I'll adjust the water here. Replanting arugula is something I can do later part of the summer because it sprouts really well and it'll grow better than direct sowing something like lettuce or spinach. Some of the cooler season greens, it's really a little bit too early to direct sow those, but I can direct sow arugula no problem. I'll just probably take this out and start over. Another thing that I'm leaving here is this lettuce. This was the variety Muir, which I absolutely loved in the summertime, and I let it bolt, and I'm gonna hopefully save some seeds from it. So that's why I'm leaving this in this pocket. Hopefully there'll be plenty of seeds, more than I would ever need. But that's why I'm not taking this out, even though it's quite an eyesore. It will give me enough seeds to hopefully last me a year or two. And finally here I have my 5-tier original planter. This one has a lot of tiers and pockets that I've got to make some decisions on. As you can see, we've got pretty mature arugula on the top here. Again, I think we got some overwatering going on with that. But once I harvest these for salads, then I will start to replant more arugula now. And then as we get into September, some of those I will replace with lettuce transplants. And then when we get into October, I will start to plant spinach. Spinach is something that doesn't germinate very well in warm soil, and I found that I usually have to wait till the later part of September, early part of October, with our average first frost being the late part of October, to be able to sow them and then germinate at a good rate. And then I will get a harvest usually in the later part of the winter. So I'm sowing spinach more for an overwintered crop. But that's what I'm doing here with these arugula tiers. I pretty much put arugula anywhere that I harvested anything over the summer. These two are where the potatoes harvested for the spring planting. And in this 3rd tier here, I've got some jalapenos. This is where the decision is a little bit difficult because most of the fall crops need to go in well before a freeze would kill these jalapeno peppers. So I have to decide, do I want to keep the jalapenos in here? Do I want to harvest them and take them out in order to plant my fall crops? And it really depends on how much do I want these jalapenos and how healthy are the plants. For my garden, if I need the jalapenos and I want to have them to continue to produce as long as possible, then I'll just keep them in there. And what you'll notice is that as we get into cooler temperatures and as the sunlight starts to decline, they will kind of stop flowering anyway. So what I would likely do is I would take them out when I start to see that the production has declined to the point where it's really not worth it. I do have a couple other jalapeno plants that are doing really well, so I may take these out anyway just because I have some in another part of the garden. But again, it's kind of a decision. How bad do you want to keep this crop versus putting something new in? As you can see, I have 4 Greenstalk planters, so I'm really not at a need to have this particular pocket to be open, but those are just some of the thought processes I have. And this can apply to tomatoes, any kind of summer crops that you're not quite sure whether to take them out or not. A lot of times I just judge it based on how much are you really producing for me and how much do I really need you, and would I rather have a fall crop in that space. Down here we have potatoes that I planted a couple weeks ago. They're just starting to emerge, so obviously those will stay in here for a fall crop just like the potatoes in the other planter. And then across here, I've got some basil. And this basil I'm pretty much using for salads about every day, but I'm really not using enough to need 2 of these plants. So I have 2 of them. I may end up taking one out because I may not need the others. And so that's another decision that I would make. Do I really need as many as I planted? And could I get away with doing fewer and be able to use these pockets for fall crops? Now that I've decided what I want to do with the crops that are in the Greenstalk planters, now I need to decide what I'm going to grow in them for the fall. In talking about what I'm taking out, I kind of mentioned some of the crops that I'm planning on growing in these planters in the fall, but I thought I would explain to you a little bit why I'm planting what I'm planting, and then also when I'm planting and why. When it comes down to it, what you decide to plant in your Greenstalks or in your containers or in your raised bed in the fall, it just depends on what you want and what you want to harvest out of it. My number one, as you probably could tell, is arugula. I love arugula, not only because I like the taste. I feel like it has better flavor than just kind of a bland lettuce, so I love to have that little bit of flavor in my salads. But also, arugula is super quick growing. You can harvest it within just a few weeks after planting, and it's really easy just to be able to plant and then harvest and then replant. It's one of my easiest crops that I grow, and it's definitely going to be a staple in my garden. And it's easy just to be able to put in here and there whenever I need to. As you can tell, I plant arugula all year round, at least from the spring into the fall, but I will probably stop planting them about October just because arugula, like every other crop, does start to slow down with the waning of daylight. So that's something that I will plant as much as I can through about early October, then I'll just stop and kind of let it continue to grow and hopefully have enough to last all winter. Lettuce is another staple in my fall garden. A lot of us want lettuce for fall salads. It's a little trickier than arugula and other greens though, because it doesn't like to germinate in warm soil. It can be direct sown in the fall, but if you want to get a head start, transplants are definitely a great option, whether you grow them indoors yourself or you buy them from the garden center. I usually start to transplant my lettuce about 2 months before my average first frost date, and then I'll continue planting them about every 2 weeks until about a month, I guess, before my average first frost date. They could still be planted after that, but you're still really battling the daylight and the growth is going to slow significantly. So I'll usually plant about 3 plantings of lettuce in the fall about 2 weeks apart. Now that's from transplant. You can also direct sow them about a month to 6 weeks before your average first frost date, assuming that the soil has the temperature has cooled off a little bit. And then really you can harvest lettuce. You don't have to wait till it gets really big, like large heads. You can harvest it as baby lettuce and have a lot of options that way. Spinach is another one that I grow. As I mentioned before, I will usually direct sow it about 4 to 6 weeks before my average first frost date. Sometimes I can get baby spinach in the fall, and if that's what you want is baby spinach, you can definitely do that. Or you can leave it in, depending on your zone, to let it overwinter. We have gotten down to below 0 Fahrenheit, and spinach has still survived over the winter. You'd be surprised how resilient it is, and there's nothing like having spinach that's starting to grow in January and February and being able to harvest it as baby spinach for salads or just regular spinach greens at that time of year when very few things are growing. That's why spinach is always a staple in my fall garden, maybe not for a fall harvest, but more so for the late winter and early spring. You can grow other typical fall crops in a Greenstalk, such as beets, carrots. I've even heard of people growing garlic in it. I've never tried that personally before. And then you can grow other greens like collard greens, turnip greens, greens mixes. I love doing greens mixes in my Greenstalk. And I even grew celery in the fall, although that would probably need to be transplanted at this point. Celery takes a long time to start from seed. But those are some other options of things that you can plant in your Greenstalk. I just prefer to really go heavy on the salads and on the greens because I want to be able to have salads that are fresh picked from my garden for as long as possible. And with the day length and the cool weather coming, you'll find that the growth of these plants really slows down a lot. And the more you can plant, the better. But more on those tips in just a minute. First though, let's talk about how to get those pockets ready, how to amend the soil to plant, what to do with the crops that are already there to be able to either transplant or direct sow your fall planting. If you've been growing in your Greenstalks or any container for that matter all spring and summer, you're definitely going to need to take steps to amend the soil. Not only will the soil level drop, but it also needs replenishment of nutrients. So I'm going to take this pocket right here. This is a pocket of arugula that I just harvested yesterday for a salad. So I'm just going to show you my process of taking what's here out, amending the soil, and replanting with new seeds. The first thing I'm going to do here, if needed, which I did because I kind of gave it a haircut yesterday, I'm going to cut the existing crops to about soil level. Just cut them out like that. Remove all that's still there. And then as you can see here, that soil level has dipped a lot. This used to be all the way up here to the top. That's completely normal with settling. So with settling, not only do we need to add more soil, but we also could use to break it up just a little bit to add some more air to this. It's definitely compacted. To do that, I like to use this Cobra head weeder. Just makes it really easy to break up those roots and compacted soil. It doesn't require a lot, but I do like to use this. Next, I'm going to top the pocket off with potting soil. This definitely needs to be a light, loose, airy potting soil like you filled it in to begin with. And you want to fill it to the top. You saw how it compacts. Fill it to the top. And next, I like to add some kind of fertilizer. I prefer Espoma's Plant Tone. I just usually eyeball it a little bit, maybe about a tablespoon a pocket. I will mix that in. The good news with fall crops is that, especially these leafy crops, they don't require as much fertilizer or nutrition as your fruiting crops like tomatoes and cucumbers and that kind of thing. But a lot of the crops we're growing in the fall are leafy, so they do require a good amount of nitrogen. That's why I like Plant Tone, because it has a higher nitrogen content. As you can see, it's kind of already settling a little bit, completely normal. And then next, I'm going to plant the seeds and water them in. My favorite arugula has been this slow bolt arugula from True Leaf Market. I like to buy these large packs because I grow so much arugula, and I just sprinkle the seed in there and cover it up and water. And it's as easy as that. Now, if I wanted to plant lettuce in one of these containers, I would just do one plant per pocket. You could do more than one, but I find if I just do one, that one can get a little bit larger and I can use more of these transplants for more pockets. The final thing I need to consider with my Greenstalks, especially when it comes to my fall garden, is their position relative to shade, sun, and even watering. You guys saw in this video where I tried out the new Greenstalk self-watering system. I loved it so much, I ended up putting it on all of my planters, and it's worked fantastic all summer long. I have it set up on a timer, and I haven't had to manually water my Greenstalks all year. I've absolutely loved it. But the only drawback here is that when you set up the watering system, that makes it where the planters aren't movable, especially if you have the mover like I've got on this one or the spinner. They pretty much are in the same position. Now in the summer, I found that that was not a problem at all because the way the sun tracks from the northeast all the way to the southwest, the sun has been able to get all the way around the Greenstalk planters with no problem. But as we go into fall and as we go into winter, that sun is going to track more on one side, more on the south side. What I've found is that in the fall and in the winter, it's actually really helpful to have either the mover or the spinner. That way I can move it out into the sun when necessary in the later part of the fall, or I can move it into the shade when I have fall crops that I've got growing in late August and early September when it's really, really hot. I like having the mover to be able to do that. At some point then, I need to make the decision of possibly when to take off the watering system. Now, obviously, once it starts freezing, I'm not going to want those hoses hooked up anyway, but I'm planning on deciding whenever we get to that kind of happy medium of when I really need to take advantage of the sunlight as much as possible and get these crops into the sun. And that I'm hoping will correspond with when I'm not going to need to water the crops as much. Fall crops do need to have plenty of water early in the season when it's really hot, but as we start to get more mild temperatures and the growth starts to slow, they are not going to need to be watered every day. So it's really not all that important to have the water in the fall and going into the winter like it was a game changer in the summer. My plan is then whenever I take this off, I'll be able to use the mover, use the spinner to be able to adjust the positions of these green stalks so that way they can get maximum sun later in the fall and early the winter. But I can also move them into the shade if we get any hot spells in September and sometimes even October in our climate to be able to help them out. There are so many different options to enjoy your Greenstalk planter in the fall. In fact, my very first Greenstalk experience was in the fall, and I have this video here to show you how I assembled it, how I filled it, and what I planted in it that first year. All it took was a little bit of experience in the fall garden to be hooked on the green stalks, and I haven't stopped growing in them since. So if you are a first-time gardener in the Greenstalk, be sure to check out their sale below. This is a fantastic way to get your feet wet in the Greenstalk world and get a feel for how amazing growing in the Greenstalk is. And if you're like me and you've already had some experience and you know how great it is, this is a great deal to get another one. So check out the link in the show notes and be sure to use my code Jill10 to get $10 off your order of $75 or more. And if you're watching this video after the sale has ended, make sure that you are on my email list, that you get my emails every Friday, because when Greenstalk comes out with sales like this or on their accessories or anything else, then you will be the first to know about it. And if you've grown anything in your Greenstalk, especially in the fall that I didn't mention, I would love to hear about it in the comments. Let me know how it went for you. And for more information on how to grow in a Greenstalk in your garden, check out this playlist right here.